Prince of Persia has a long and storied history, but there hasn't been a mainline game for some 13 years, and you have to go back further than that to find a really good one, whether it's the pleasing 2008 open world reboot or 2003's The Sands of Time, which we personally feel represents the very best of the franchise. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is looking even further back for its inspirations though. Rather than being a third-person action-adventure, it's actually a side-scrolling game, similar to the original that was released in 1989. Rendered in its 2.5D style, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown features a very pretty world for you to explore. It's all sunlit sands and dilapidated ruins throughout the stretch of the game that we got to preview, and this is a step away from the now traditionally darker and slightly emo art style that Warrior Within started in the franchise, but it's charming and pretty enough in its own right. It's the character animations that stand out as being particularly good alongside this, as they look especially smooth, and while they might sport a more modern feeling haircut than you would expect, Sargon is clearly a Prince of Persia character. While he is the protagonist, he is not granted the status of being a prince. Instead, Sargon is a member of the ridiculously accomplished band of warriors known as the Immortals, sent on a quest to the city of Mount Kaf to try and rescue the kidnapped Prince Hassan. If you played Prince of Persia before, then you probably know what to expect to find there. There's enemies, traps and time manipulation shenanigans, and all three of those are here in full force.
Don't worry.
Enemies are obviously a constant threat on your journey, especially since every time that you rest to refill your health, they will respawn, forcing you to fight your way back through them all over again. It's a little gameplay inspiration that is obviously taken from Dark Souls and its ilk. Thankfully, you might not mind this, simply because the combat is so rewarding, especially once you've gotten used to some of the finer details, such as directional attacks and the timing of your parries. Yes, this is parry-heavy combat, with red highlighted attacks that must be dodged instead of deflected. This isn't entirely original of course, but it's still very engaging and more importantly, really quite challenging. That is especially true of the bosses, who are quite a bit of a spectacle to say the least. There's also the constant threat of traps to contend with, ranging from simple spikes against walls all the way up to an entire room that rearranges itself with multiple waves of giant spinning maces and things like this to avoid. Thankfully, the platforming and traversal is very smooth and snappy as well, and you'll gradually unlock abilities that help you get around a little bit better. Some of these abilities will also give you access to new areas, thanks to being able to enhance your dash to allow you to jump further and clear bigger gaps. Of course, this is also plenty useful in combat. These traps initially seem quite daunting, especially when watching someone jump through them 18 times in a row in the trailers, but they're not actually as difficult as they look. More importantly, they very rarely lead to death. The aforementioned trap room does demand perfection or you have to restart, but it's an optional side quest that, yeah, we eventually pulled it off. They will probably take more attempts than you'd be willing to admit, but it is incredibly satisfying when you do finally manage to overcome it. And even if the platforming is a bit too much for you, the game apparently includes a platforming assist in the options to get you through it, which is nice to see, though not something that we had a chance to try out in this preview. There weren't too many time-related shenanigans in this early section of the game that we played, but the ones that did appear looked typically cool, namely a giant statue that had been frozen as it was just falling apart, and then when you hit floating orbs of time, probably, it would rearrange itself to allow you to climb up it. The statue is featured in an entire dilapidated temple where people who arrive at the same time seem to then be experiencing the passage of time at different rates. This was fascinating and has me really looking forward to seeing more of this kind of thing in the full game. So, The Lost Crown is basically a fusion of 2D and 3D Prince of Persia games, resulting in a 2.5D action-adventure which has got challenging but fair combat, huge bosses, traps galore, and the obligatory timey-wimey stuff. It also mixes in the influences from bonfires and enemies respawning from Dark Souls, for example, and some metroidvania progression elements as well. but it does seem to be combining all of these elements into a game that is really worth a look in its own right. So far, it seems very promising and should be one to keep an eye on as it heads to release on the 18th of January 2024. You'll be able to check this game out ever so slightly before then though, because just last week Ubisoft announced they are releasing a demo for the game, a free demo, on the 11th of January, so you'll have a week's head start before the full game release. Between now and then though, well, I hope that you've enjoyed our look at this game. If you have done so, make sure to like, subscribe, do all of the usual YouTube things, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Goodbye!